Many seniors, even after a lifetime of experiences, carry a silent fear that grows as the years pass. It's not the fear of illness or loneliness, but something deeper: the moment of departure. Death, for some, seems like a dark and cold wall. For others, a calm and inevitable doorway. The difference between one view and the other, according to Michael Newton's studies, isn't in the events themselves, but in the mental attitude of someone approaching that moment. And that's where matured awareness plays a central role. By observing dozens of accounts under deep hypnosis, Newton realized that the way a person faces their own mortality can radically transform their experience at the moment of transition. Fear constricts, hardens, and complicates. Acceptance liberates. It sounds simple, but this understanding changes everything. And that's what we need to reflect on today in a practical, respectful, and direct way, without beating around the bush or exaggerated mysticism. What do you feel when you hear the word death? For many, it's synonymous with an end. For others, it's a mystery. But there are also those who, with the passage of years, begin to see it as a natural process, as common as birth. According to Michael Newton, this difference in perception is decisive in the soul's experience after leaving the body. We're not talking about religion or blind faith, but a pattern observed in hundreds of accounts that reveals something powerful. The mind's attitude shapes the soul's journey. And if this is true, how have we been nourishing our minds? With fear and resistance, or with serenity and preparation? It's worth reflecting on. If this content makes you think differently, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. This helps us keep this space for conscious exchange alive, welcoming, and accessible to those who most need to hear these messages with clarity and respect. The great key lies in understanding that fear doesn't come from the unknown itself, but from a lack of emotional preparedness to deal with it. Michael Newton describes impressive cases of seniors who, even when ill or close to their end, maintained a posture of serene surrender. And this made all the difference in what they experienced right after physical death. These individuals reported smooth, welcoming, and even lucid transitions, as if they were just changing environments, not ending their existence. On the other hand, those who resisted, who fought against the inevitable with anger or denial, described confused, slow, and initially disoriented experiences. This wasn't punishment, but a reflection of the mind. The state of mind before the last breath was what shaped the first steps into the other realm. This leads us to a direct question: how do we want to depart? Acceptance doesn't mean giving up or weakness. It represents a high degree of wisdom. The senior who accepts their journey with serenity demonstrates that they have understood the cycle of life. They are not surrendering to suffering, but taking control of the only thing that truly matters at this moment: how they will face their farewell. According to the records analyzed by Newton, this attitude influences not only what one feels during the passage, but also how the soul is received and guided after separation from the body. This doesn't depend on rituals or promises, but on an internal preparation done during life. And it's not something reserved for a few enlightened individuals. We all have this capacity to change our stance in the face of the end. It's a choice that begins in the mind and strengthens with time. Even for those who are past 80, it's still possible to transform this perspective. Many seniors who face the fear of death carry unresolved traumas, pains, and regrets. This is human, natural, but it can also be worked through with awareness. Michael Newton reports that the soul does not carry external judgments, but rather the reflection of its own emotional state. When someone departs in internal conflict, the first stage after death is precisely dealing with that discomfort. Not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of what was not resolved in life. However, when the departure occurs with a feeling of gratitude, reconciliation, and understanding, the soul moves forward with more lightness. This shows that true preparation is not done in hospitals, but within one's consciousness. It's not about avoiding the end, but about living it as part of a larger process, which proceeds with more clarity when the mind is at peace. Accepting death is not an act of passivity, but of clear-headed courage. It requires a willingness to look inward, review life stories, release guilt, and realize that life doesn't need to be perfect to be full. The fear of death often stems from the fear of not having lived enough or from regret over choices not made. But it is possible to reframe all of this. The senior who decides, even in their final chapters, to give new meaning to what they have lived completely changes the energy they carry upon departing. Newton describes in detail that the soul perceives this change from the inside out. It's as if one's own consciousness opens a clearer path for the transition. It's not magic, it's emotional preparation. And this preparation can begin now, with small gestures, sincere conversations, or even with the simple act of listening to a reflection like this until the end. Throughout his research, Michael Newton identified that the soul's transition isn't automatic, but deeply influenced by the state of consciousness at the moment of death. Seniors who cultivated thoughts of acceptance and understanding reported feelings of immediate welcome, as if they were being kindly awaited. This didn't happen because they were special, but because they were open to perceiving. The opposite was also observed. When the mind is closed by fear, the soul feels lost, even when it is being supported. It's like a radio with a weak signal. The reception frequency is blocked. Help is there, but it's not perceived. This reinforces the importance of working on the mind while we are still here, conscious, lucid, and capable of change. It's not about seeking spiritual guarantees, but about creating the internal conditions for the passage to occur with minimal resistance and maximum clarity possible. There's no specific age to start this process. Many believe that since they are already nearing the end of their lives, it's no longer worthwhile to reflect on these topics. But Newton observed the opposite. Some of the most beautiful accounts came from people who, even at 90 years old, decided to transform their view on dying. All it took was a sincere conversation, a compassionate listening ear, a gesture of reconciliation for everything to change. The soul doesn't have an expiration date. The mind can also flourish in its last autumn. The senior who faces this period with humility and a willingness to learn something new activates a silent but powerful force within themselves. They don't deny reality, but transform it with consciousness. This decision alters the type of energy they carry, and according to Newton, this directly impacts the experience immediately after the physical body detaches. What begins in thought ends in direction. Many family members don't know how to deal with a senior who expresses fear of death. They try to avoid the topic, change the subject, make promises, or create distractions. This comes from a place of care, but also from a collective denial. Talking about death doesn't invite death. On the contrary, it helps make it more understandable. Newton emphasized that seniors who were able to talk about their fears, desires, and memories before passing showed a more peaceful transition. They felt seen, respected, not ignored. Listening is a silent but potent remedy. When a senior can express what they feel without being interrupted or corrected, something opens up within them. And this is reflected in the calmness with which they face their last days. The attitude of family, caregivers, and friends also matters. The way we embrace the topic of death directly influences how it is experienced. Michael Newton emphasizes that the soul continues to have the same emotional perceptions right after death. This means there isn't an instant break from everything one felt in life. The person who departs with anger, fear, or excessive attachment takes those feelings with them. They don't disappear automatically. That's why it's so important to learn to deal with emotions while there's still time. The older a person gets, the more opportunities they have to review what they've lived and release unnecessary burdens. This is an internal process that requires honesty, but it doesn't demand perfection. Newton isn't talking about sainthood or purity, but about emotional clarity. The senior who learns to acknowledge what they feel without running away creates a safe space within themselves, and that space accompanies them wherever they go. What seems invisible here becomes a tool there, and that, according to the accounts, makes all the difference in the soul's journey. It's common to think that accepting death is the same as losing faith in life, but that's a misconception. In truth, accepting death is one of the deepest acts of love for one's own existence. It means that the person has looked at their history with respect acknowledged their victories and also their failures, and chosen to end the cycle with dignity. Newton describes this as a type of liberation that expands consciousness. The soul, upon detaching from a body that has fulfilled its purpose, feels freer when it doesn't have to carry guilt, fear, or regret. This doesn't mean everything needs to be resolved, but that an effort was made to understand what was possible. Acceptance doesn't eliminate pain, but it reduces the burden. And for someone in the final stretch of life, this lightness can represent the difference between a confused passage and a calm and clear transition. In Michael Newton's studies, the most striking point is the finding that the mind, even after death, remains active for a time. Consciousness still perceives, feels, and interprets. This explains why the way we die influences the soul's first moments outside the body. If the mind is agitated, the perception of the new reality will also be. If it is calm, the recognition of the new plane occurs more naturally. Nothing is imposed. Everything is experienced according to the person's internal state. This brings a responsibility but also hope. We can prepare even without knowing the day or hour. We can cultivate serenity in the midst of the unknown. And most importantly, this preparation doesn't require grand theories, just small daily choices about how we react to life. Because in the end, the way we live will be the ground we walk on after we depart. The connection between mind and soul, according to Newton, is stronger than we imagine. While many traditions speak of external judgment, his account suggests something more intimate. The soul is self-reflecting. It feels what it failed to live, perceives what it postponed, revisits decisions with a broader perspective, and all of this is influenced by the disposition with which it left the body. When the departure happens with acceptance, this review is lighter. When there is resistance, it becomes a slower process. It's not about punishment, but about internal rhythm. This helps to understand why so many seniors who cultivate serenity report peace even in the most difficult moments. They are not running from pain, but integrating it. They are preparing themselves not just for the end of life, but for the continuity of consciousness. And this choice, however subtle it may seem, has profound repercussions on the experience that follows. It's important to emphasize that preparing for death doesn't have to be done alone. Sharing with other seniors, with professionals who know how to listen, with family members who are open to conversation, can be transformative. Newton describes that many accounts of gentle transitions were linked to well-nurtured emotional bonds. A simple request for forgiveness, a sincere hug, a previously neglected conversation can change the emotional state of someone about to depart. Affection doesn't dissolve all fears, but it creates a firmer foundation to face them. When seniors feel loved and valued, even when facing departure, their souls are strengthened. This shows that it's not just an individual journey, but also a relational one. We are affected by the connections we create, and by strengthening these bonds, even in the final days, we are also preparing the spirit to move on in peace. Michael Newton also observed that the notion of time changes after death. The soul does not experience time as we do here. But this doesn't mean everything happens instantaneously. The mind continues to be an important filter. Those who depart in despair may take longer to perceive where they are. However, those who accept the detachment with more clarity report a quicker adaptation. This difference doesn't depend on age, health, or level of knowledge, but on emotional attitude. Therefore, it's worth investing time in preparing this attitude. It's possible to age with more purpose when one understands that every day is a chance to pacify the mind. And the more this peace is built in life, the less confusion there is in the transition. Death, in this sense, is not a rupture, but a prolongation of what was already forming within each of us. One of the most recurring images in the sessions analyzed by Newton is that of a reception after death. Many reported the presence of guides, already deceased relatives, or figures of light. But the curious thing is that this reception varied greatly according to the emotional state of the soul. Those who were calm and conscious perceived these presences clearly. However, the more confused or resistant ones reported a sensation of emptiness or mist. This suggests that what changes is not what exists on the other side, but the capacity to perceive. The mind acts like a lens. If it is at peace, the vision is clear. If it is in conflict, everything seems opaque. This finding reinforces that the true preparation for death is a practice of inner clarity. It's not about knowing what will come, but being available to perceive, welcome, and orient oneself in the new space with tranquility. Another point that deserves attention is the difference between fear and respect for death. To have respect is to acknowledge the importance of the moment, its delicacy, its depth. Fear, on the other hand, paralyzes and prevents any kind of preparation. Newton observed that seniors who cultivated a serene respect for death, without dramatization, were more likely to have harmonious transition experiences. This happened because respect opens space for understanding, while fear creates closure. It's possible to feel apprehension and still remain calm. This is natural. What makes a difference is not letting that apprehension turn into despair. The senior mind, rich with experiences, has the capacity to look at this moment with greater breadth. And when that happens, the soul benefits. It departs carrying not only memories but also the emotional framework that will help with the first steps outside of physical life. The accounts gathered by Newton make it clear that the soul's transition is an extension of what we cultivate in our minds. It's not about external punishments or rewards, but a reflection of the internal state of the departing individual. This completely changes how we should prepare. There's no use seeking promises of salvation if the mind remains consumed by fear. True salvation in these accounts lies in clarity, understanding, and acceptance. The senior who comprehends this does not surrender to sadness, but to discernment. They begin to take care of what they think, what they feel, what they say, because they understand that these elements do not disappear with death. They follow with the soul, shaping the perception of what is to come, and this is liberating, because it means there is still something to be done, even now, even today. Even with little time, there is still power in how one chooses to live what remains. Many seniors carry the feeling that their story is over, that there's nothing more to do or change. But according to the accounts analyzed by Michael Newton, this is precisely the moment when small internal decisions make all the difference. The soul that departs with the feeling of having given its best, even if in the last days, carries with it a lightness that cannot be measured by accomplishments or possessions. It's the emotional weight that diminishes. A forgiveness asked for, a letter written, a respected silence. All of this contributes to a calmer passage. The soul's time is not measured by the clock, but by the intensity and quality of what is lived internally. And that's why it's never too late to change. Every moment of clarity can be an opportunity for preparation. Every thought can be a step towards peace. Death doesn't erase who we are. It simply invites us to continue in another form. It's common for older individuals to feel that they are gradually saying goodbye. The loss of functions, the absence of loved ones, physical limitations, everything seems to signal the end. But Newton reminds us that the soul does not suffer this wear and tear. It remains whole, attentive, receptive. And if this awareness is understood while still alive, the senior can experience a new form of presence, more internal, more subtle, but equally significant. Preparing for death doesn't have to be painful. It can be a process of emotional organization, reconciliation with the past, and openness to the mystery with more calm. This doesn't require grand acts, just attention to what one feels. Because, contrary to what is often thought, it is in the simplicity of the final days that many souls find their greatest clarity, and that clarity is the greatest gift one can take on the journey. Those who depart in peace are not the ones who lived without mistakes, but the ones who learn to deal with them. Newton observed that the soul understands life as a learning process, not a judgment. This means that unresolved guilt can be softened by understanding and sincere remorse. The mind that recognizes its limits, that takes responsibility and seeks amends, even if only in thought, transforms burden into wisdom. And this wisdom accompanies the soul in transition. It's not about erasing the past, but re-signifying it. The senior who faces their mistakes with maturity, without punishing themselves but seeking meaning, finds within themselves a silent strength that will be useful at the moment of detachment. Because deep down, what defines our passage is not what we lived, but what we learned from what we lived. And that is a choice accessible until the very last breath. Many accounts show that the soul, upon realizing it is leaving the body, seeks an emotional anchor. This anchor can be a memory, a person, a phrase, or even an inner certainty. Newton reported that those who departed connected to a feeling of love, gratitude, or acceptance had a smoother adaptation to the new state. This shows that, even at the moment of death, we have some degree of choice. We can choose what to remember, what to feel, where to focus. This choice, however subtle, sets the tone of the transition. Therefore, preparing is not about memorizing ideas or repeating beliefs, but training the mind to return to what is essential. When the body begins to quiet, it is the soul that takes over, and it will carry with it the last felt vibration. May it be a vibration of peace. May it be a confident look towards what is not yet seen, but which exists and welcomes. Death, however feared, is also a return to what we are without roles, without the body's limits, without the pressures of matter. And according to Newton, this return can be surprisingly serene when the mind does not resist. The senior who understands this does not fall into despair. They prepare. They organize their feelings, say what needs to be said, listen to what needs to be heard. They know that the end is not failure, but part of a larger cycle. And with this awareness, their soul finds fertile ground to flourish on the other side. Nothing that was lived is lost. Everything is integrated. And this is perhaps the most important lesson. We do not need to fear death when we make peace with life. What awaits us is not darkness, but continuity. A continuity shaped by how we choose to live our last days, with presence and truth. If this video resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from this reflection. Sometimes, a simple listen changes everything. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please join us. Here we aim to talk about life with honesty and respect, even when the topic is the end, because talking about death is, at its core, an act of love for life. By understanding that our mental attitude has the power to shape the soul's experience, we begin to live with more awareness and depart with more serenity. The preparation is not in external rituals, but in the silence with which we look inward. And if there is something we can choose even in the final moments, it is the way we want to conclude this journey. May it be with clarity. May it be with lightness. May it be with the certainty that there is more beyond fear. There is passage. There is welcome, and there is continuity.